Hi, I'm David King. Welcome back to the CollabCast. I'm joined by Anjali Powell.
Hi.
Hi. Lucy Breyer from Confetti Stage, and Angelique is an actress. And we Remy Monet, who you should be familiar with by now.
Jean-Remy Monet.
Yes.
Remy.
You guys are here to discuss The Mountaintop, which obviously this month has connotations including Black History Month, but it's a really powerful work regardless.
Right.
And I was thinking a lot about, The Meeting is another play that's being staged locally soon. Thinking a lot about that, and I just watched the documentary on Malcolm X on Netflix, which is really stunning and really got me thinking about civil rights leaders. And it's something I think we all should sort of be encouraged to think about more throughout the year.
Right.
But this is such a powerful story. The night of Martin Luther King's last night in a hotel room. And I guess I'm wondering how you approach something like this when it is such the reality is so much more than I think you would even try to. I mean, it is fictionalized, but the reality itself is so powerful and so dramatic and so painful and so. So how do you approach that when you're telling that story?
Authentically.
Yeah.
I think it's the first thing that popped into my mind, because when you talk about these civil rights leaders and talking about, needing to discuss them throughout the year, and I get emotional because we're still rehearsing, and I get extremely emotional about the process in this whole story. But, at the core, they're all people, just like we're all people. And I think it's easy for me to think of that from terms of an actress standpoint or an actor standpoint, because the only way to portray these characters in a way that's tangible and accessible is not to think of them as these historical figures, who are making these really elegant and articulate speeches at a podium that are memorialized forever. But who were they as people? And I get really, really emotional about who these people were, because we're just people. And so we all also have the capacity in us to help be the affect that changes something.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons when Confetti approaches me and asks me, to direct a show for them for Black History Month, and I can choose any play I want, and then I did pick three. Two of them I submitted to Lucy and Steve, which is The Meeting, and Mountaintop. So they picked Mountaintop, which was also my favorite, because the reason I like it, because there's a story telling about Martin Luther King. Everybody, thought he was a great man, yes, but everybody thought he was a saint, and an angel, But the play, when you watch it, you get to see that he was somebody just like us, And then who was doing things just like. So I picked that, and I knew for sure that I was going to have fun doing it, and it's funny, and then and it tells you some great stories about him, and he's human. He's just like everybody else. Yeah. So and I needed to have the perfect cast, and Angelique is one of them.
Stop.
It's interesting because this time of year, I mean, I guess it goes on all year long now, but sort of people on social media picking the pieces of Martin Luther King that they want to represent whatever their thing is. And I think it's powerful to think about, obviously, as you said, this man is a human being, but also that he's someone on a journey. That what he says wasn't memorialized the instant he said it. It was all about development and work and picking the pieces of things that he wanted to represent and coming to the realization of what he was up against and what he needed to say to get people going. So, I mean, what's it like to pick as an actress, sort of, I know you're saying to be authentic, but to sort of show that it's a story and a journey and a part of someone's life. I mean, how do you approach that?
I mean, I think about it in terms of my own life, right?
Yeah.
We're all on our own journey, right? And there's a lot of conversation now about imposter syndrome and do I deserve to be here in this moment? And so it's thinking about things from my own frame of reference of where I'm coming from and where I've come from, and like, I don't know a single perfect person, but I know people who are trying really, really hard and are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I also know that, I don't know everything, and that I come with my own biases and privileges when I come into, whatever circumstance that I'm involved in. And I think that learning more about other people and his willingness to learn about other people and be tolerant of other people, but I think it's so important to see him in this framework of not being perfect while we're all kind of navigating life,
Right.
especially right now with all of the things that are going on. I think what's so important is to recognize that, one, we're not perfect, but two, we all have so much to learn about each
Right.
other.
Yeah, I mean, the imposter syndrome thing,
All the time.
I find myself talking to freelancers who might think that I'm in some sort of position where, oh, well, you have it figured out, and you're like, well, no, you never get to that. I mean, maybe someone does, but you're always you're always striving, and you're always questioning. And if you're not questioning, I think there's always that you're in trouble. I mean,
Right.
you might have lost the plot.
And, in these moments, you get to see him really questioning.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
What am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Even when he has these conversations of saying, like, I've been hoping to die, but I don't want to die. And, we all go through that,
Right.
these very real human moments of like, and just imagining how other people kind of see you the way we see Dr. Martin Luther King. But we all go through these periods of such severe self-doubt and am I on the right path?
Yeah.
By the way, Eni Nelson, who played Martin Luther King, couldn't be here today, so just wanted to say that.
Well, if I had, not that I would have that rule, but if I had that rule, I would spend a lot of time working on that. It's overwhelming. I mean, a lot of the reading, that I've done, what gets me about both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X in the reading I've done lately, and even these documentaries, is the human vulnerability, the idea that they are putting so much on the line, including their families, including
Right.
their reputations down the line, and to line up against the government. And I mean, the drama can't be any. There aren't higher stakes than to essentially put yourself open to attack from not only people,
Right.
and people might disagree with you, but an entire government that thinks you're a threat to.
Right.
And then when you look at what that means for them, rather, and the people around them, rather than just the movement, that's when it's frightening to think about how vulnerable you'd be in that situation, because as much as these people are now considered, legendary and almost martyrs, and they are, but there were those moments when it had to come to them that they weren't going to move past this, and they both men knew that. I mean, and that's.
That's an extraordinary part of the story, is that Martin Luther King delivers this sermon on the mountaintop. Well, what's the mountaintop all about? It's about Moses being on the mountaintop and not getting to the promised land.
Right.
Yeah.
Seeing the promised land and not getting there. And so it's like, you think about it, and shivers just run down your spine to think this is the sermon he delivered the night before he was assassanated.
Yeah.
And that this play to some extent picks up on that, what may be a premonition or a hope even, right? A challenge, and it's an extraordinary play by a young woman who grew up in Memphis.
Katori Hall, we love you.
Who was surrounded by this legend, but also grew up in the community that had experienced this actual horror, the inspiration, and she tells a wonderful story about her grandmother being denied the right to go march because
Wow.
it was too dangerous. And but having participated in the earlier marches, and I think what history has forgotten is that a young man had actually been killed at one of the earlier marches, and that was the tension over this particular strike and the particular march that was planned for the day of the assassination was this background of just a week before having lost a young man in this community, supposedly a looter. The community doesn't believe that.
Right.
So, high tension in the city, high tension about this strike, which is so important to the people there, and then high tension nationally at what is feared, the feared riots, the feared, loss of control completely. And all of that somehow is embodied in this amazing two-person play.
Yeah.
It's really an extraordinary achievement.
I think hearing all of that does, and thinking about it does put it in this perspective, this amazing time, and we think about it as these times that, are separate in some ways from the world we live in today, but you see that we relive them, and we see now, people who protested and wind up dead, or
Right.
we see people having to make that same decision, and it does make me wonder if we'll see these stories told again in 10 years, in a playwright picked up, or 20 years, whatever it is, and seeing what this period was and the turmoil that people were going through, and the choices they had to make to move things forward. But what's your thoughts in terms of, we talked a little bit about this last time, but using theater to sort of tell the stories, the historical stories that are undertold. Do you get folks? What's your takeaway in terms of what folks walk away with after seeing something like this? Do you find that they've reconsidered history? Do you find that they've?
I totally, especially after my last show that you saw at the Night Cities, and we had a talk back on Sunday, and people, white women, who came to see the show, who stayed after for the talk back and going home with tears because they see themselves in the same position that professor was. Yeah. And they go home and write stories on Facebook how that changed their mind. The whole attitude about things they grew up in a bubble, things they didn't know, that stories like this open their mind. A lot of people, activists. If some people call me activist because of the kind of shows that I put in, I don't know if I am, or maybe I am, I don't know. But a lot of people fight, protests and they write poetry. Some people go out and protest, have marches. Some people use guns and protest against injustice. But me, those stories, they don't teach you in school, in college, and you grow up, whether you're black or white. And I just thought that when I started this, the Black Theater Troupe, and my vision, my hope to bring stories like this that tell, and put it on stage and educate people. And that's how I protest. That's how I do my marches. I find plays to educate people, to tell you this is what happened to us. You didn't learn it in school. I'm going to teach you today, and I get actors who can deliver those stories. And because otherwise, because you can learn a lot from watching movies and go on stage. Okay, because I learned most of my histories, I may have said it to you before, through theater. Most of my American history through theater. When you're a Haitian who come here, I know about Haitian history to St. Louverture, but I had nothing about, even Martin Luther King until I started doing theater. And I know myself, if I put in a show to educate people, I have to do my own research to educate myself and then educate people. And it does change people's mind, whether you're black or white. When you do live, you do learn something. It really does make the world a better, place if you understand. Even if you don't go out and act on it, but at least next time you want to do something stupid, you'll think about, I'm human. Those people are human, and it does help you. You do take a lot from that. And that's my hope, my dream to continue doing it. And it's great, when I see theater companies like Confetti Stage, who's reaching out to another, a person of color, director of color, to come and work with them, because that's always also my dream to see that in the local community theater, work and more inclusive and everything else. So it's, and that's how things are changing already. So.
I mean, the niceties that stuck with me throughout, there's been a number of things that have made me consider that situation, including my life, which I think it's interesting. None of us, it's easy to stop thinking about the struggle when you reach a certain spot. And, I think I had a few years where I got married and had a child and we bought a house, and it was suddenly not thinking about, and I was like, well, everything's good now. And then, it was the shootings and the police stops that made my wife and I consider the child we were bringing into the world and we did this intentionally, but what kind of world is it? And it really shattered that. And then even looking now at the idea that, okay, well, those years under Obama allowed us to reach this stage in our, making enough money to support something, but there are these millions of other people who are not in that position and are still struggling. And making a decision to help them rather than to say, well, but I made it. And by made it, it just means you're, that professor, maybe she's not the greatest professor in the world and the richest, but she still feels like she's made it, and she considered everything she has to. But Angelique, I'd be remiss, it's something we've talked about a lot of folks, and Aaron last week, but the idea of, are there enough roles you find yourself being able to work as a Black woman in the area?
Oh, geez, yeah, yeah. So it's a twofold question, truly.
Yeah.
Are there enough roles? Are there enough roles of the roles I want to be playing?
Yeah.
Those are two different questions, really. I find more and more that there are some people have an appetite now, right, for this type of theater. Theater makes these types of conversations way more accessible than if we were to sit down and try and have this dialogue without bringing an artistic piece into the atmosphere, right? So there is a genuine appetite for this type of theater I see locally. Still, though, that being said, it's not necessarily all being produced or being put on. And, I think it's wonderful that Confetti was able to collaborate with Black theater troupe of upstate New York, and make sure that something really important was brought to the Capital Region community. But I absolutely think that there's definitely so much more work to do. There's so many playwrights that are writing things. I mean, this isn't Katori Hall's only play, you know, and there's so many playwrights that I haven't seen produced locally at all that are still writing these stories. And a lot of these stories have nothing to do with, necessarily slavery or with historical figures that we all are very familiar with, right? And then there's, I'm thinking of so this weekend is opening weekend of The Photograph, a movie with Issa Rae, and Lakeith Wakefield, I believe is his name.
Yes.
And I'm really excited about it because of what it means for an artist of color specifically. One, it's so cool to see not just two people of color fall in love, but two dark-skinned people of color, a representation that we've never seen really before. And then two, to really embrace this idea of we can just be in love. We are human beings, and our entire existence, while there is this constant background of, experiencing this struggle, isn't struggle.
Yeah.
We fall in love, we get our heart broken, we get promotions, we get to be a part of really exciting things. And so I think that while these stories are important too, I want to see more theater where Black people just get to be people.
I mean, there have been a lot of films, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there have been notable films in the last 5 years that do touch on those subjects, and though they're getting people's attention.
Yeah.
Moonlight or We the Animals, things that put those relationships. I mean, and not that they're everyday life,
Right.
but they are about family and and love, and I mean, and it's striking. What's striking about it is to notice that it wasn't there before.
For sure, for sure. I've had this conversation before in the sense that, I have been a wife before in shows.
Yeah.
I have not been in love on stage before, and that's different.
Wow.
And that speaks to how people see Black people and Black relationships. And, oftentimes people are confused about why Black love is such a political act, but the personal is the political. And in order to be Black and in love with everything that's going on, it's such a strongly politically motivated movement.
Yeah.
I've been married to Remy on stage, and there was not a lot of love in that relationship,
No.
and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on that sort of the question of Black roles in the community and representation and how the community can work to bring sort of more things to life?
Well, I think I've only been active in local theater for a dozen or so years, and in that time, I've seen an extraordinary change in casting.
Yeah.
I think small community theater companies like Confetti still have a problem attracting a diverse actor base. We still don't. We actually, a few years ago, we did a play called Water by the Spoonful. It was a Pulitzer Prize winner. It was, and it required, as part of the agenda of the play, a couple of Hispanic actors, an African American actor, an Asian American, and we had trouble casting. We had trouble attracting. We eventually had to kind of beat the bushes for at least one of those roles, and that was 5 years ago, and I think it wouldn't be so problematic today. But I do think that Black Theater Troupe of Upstate New York has been pretty aggressive. There now are a couple of, or three, essentially African-American troupes locally. We have an incredibly active community theater base in the Capital District.
It's stunning.
We counted how many people were advertising on the local Capdist audition notice a few years ago, and there were over 60 different companies at various times trying to attract actors, and that did not count all of the youth groups now, which are mostly tuition-based and so slightly different. So, there's a lot of theater going on, but I don't think it's representative of the population particularly. But then our audiences are not representative of the population either. I was talking with Remy about The Niceties, which was very, very well produced. And I think you were saying that even though this is a story about contemporary racism, essentially, you were attracting mostly white audiences.
Right.
It was on a campus, and a mostly white campus, and I think that's true in general of our theater audience, of our theater populations.
But I would say conversely, like I went to see Ben Butler at Curtain Call Theater, and I walked in, and the first thing I noted was like, wow, I have never seen this much diversity in an audience, particularly at Curtain Call, before, and I was really excited to see that. And I think that a part of that has to do with, like, you can't have a season of, like, okay, I'm going to throw doubt at you, and then the rest of your season is Agatha Christie, and expect people of color to find your theater company accessible.
Well, my family, my wife's family, has been involved in theater for a while locally, and I'd wind up going to plays that I felt the need to walk out of because they were you know, what you might call classic or old school, but they were steeped in racism, and they were, you know, and you know, obviously some people would say, well, they still need to be put on, but I can't sit there for it.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, I do think, and then the other thing, you know, and I think, you know, Morgan from Illuminate Theater was doing a lot of really good work on was creating spaces or bringing people to spaces where
Absolutely.
they felt welcome, and could, and Remy, obviously you too, in making people comfortable.
Right.
And you know, I think that obviously it's not everyone can take the time to dedicate themselves to do that, but I you know, I think there is progress. I would.
Right.
Absolutely. And
But-
Patrick White does a lot of work doing
Yeah.
that. And he was the
Patrick.
director of Ben Butler. He does
Right.
amazing work of going to spaces where there are artists of color
Yeah, right.
and welcoming them to his auditions and welcoming them to his classes and things like that. So I just think that there's a lot more work to be done in that way. And I would also say that as a person of color, someone who has this lived experience all the time, sometimes that's not what I want to see on my night off too,
Yeah.
you know?
So, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that with Patrick White, you know, in doing the work. Because one thing people don't understand, you know, if you're trying, you know, to be more inclusive, bring people of color. We never had it before, okay? People have no experience, okay?
Right.
They very intimidated, they're shy, they've never done it, and you expect them to come out and audition for you, okay? You got to go after them,
Yeah.
like Patrick's doing. You got to go
Aggressively,
after them.
yeah.
If you build it, they'll come.
Right.
Okay, I'm out every day. I go after that. You know, and I talk to people, people of color, Black, Hispanic, and Asian. I go after you. I'm in the laundry room. I see somebody, you know, professionally and nicely, respectfully. I approach you. Next thing you know, they're on my stage. Okay, but you got to go after them and talk
But
to
it's
them.
not an exaggeration.
No, that's true. You know, they're on my stage. You know, that's the same thing I'm doing with bringing the audience, you know, to make it more colorful. I like saying that, to make it more colorful. And I mean, when I first started, 95% of people in the audience were white. Now, now most of the time when I have a show, especially in Albany, now I can say that half the audience is people of color, because I go after those people too, not just to be on my stage. You gotta go. You can't, a lot of theaters around here, they're saying they can't find actors. Well, they're not gonna come to you if you don't give them something and talk to them, that will attract them to work with you. It's not just the work; it's how you treat them. Okay, how you treat them, and they'll come to you, and you go and talk to them, make them feel comfortable, have a nice conversation with them.
Yeah.
Most of my audition, I don't put people on stage.
Yeah.
And said, okay, give me a monologue, and you've been doing theater for 40 years. You still suck at audition. You still don't want to audition. Really. So, and then I'm going to ask somebody brand new and put you on stage or expect you to come in and audition for me. No. Okay. My best audition is to sit down, have some coffee. Let's get to know each other. You get to know about your personality and make you feel comfortable, because I can put you on stage. You've never done it before. And then when you're done, people think you've been doing it for 20 years. You got to give them a chance to come out and to come out and be a part.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, Camp Logan, I'm doing there in April. 1, 2, 3 of the actors are brand new, and the first audition they come in, they're like, wow. Okay, and it's not if you make them feel comfortable, you talk to them and bring it out of them, okay, and teach them and spend some time, meet with them outside off stage, and give them a good experience, and they're gonna want to come back, and encourage them to go out there.
Absolutely.
You're not here just for the Black Theater Troupe,
Right.
okay? The Black Theater Troupe was not formed to, it's a troupe, but we're community theater. We
Yeah.
train people, I work with you, and then go out there. I have a bunch of actors out there who started with the Black Theater Troupe, and it feels good to know they're doing their thing out there. It's because, they had a good experience at first, and you have to go. You have to go after them.
Yep.
Okay. Because,
Yes, it's important to note
Yeah.
because there's a common misconception in this community that there aren't actors of color in the area. And it's astounding to me that the misconception continues because I moved back about 4 years ago and heard that back then, and I'm still hearing that today. And I keep meeting beautiful, wonderful, extraordinary, very talented actors of color because I've gone to different spaces to perform, and it's important to recognize that it is about making your space accessible and tangible to actors and comfortable to actors of color, and not because there's a shortage of actors of color. I was at an audition on Monday, and someone was referring to In the Heights that happened at SLOC, and they said, yeah, all those actors, they're from New York City. And I said, I jumped into the conversation. This was not my conversation, and I did, but I felt like I needed to say something. And I was like, actually, all of those actors are local actors. Oh, well, there was a rumor they're all from New York City. And I responded, and I said, well, there's a rumor that there's no actors of color in the area, but here we are. And the other actors of color in the room, they all, they laughed and agreed with me because that's a common thing that we hear, that there's not enough talent to cast the shows, and that's why those shows aren't being produced. And that simply just
There's
isn't
so
the case.
much talent in there. Just because you've never been on stage doesn't mean you're not talented.
Right.
You gotta bring. I mean, we have the two youngest kids, 7 years old. You work with her, and their fathers now was in my last show, and both of his kids, first time. It wasn't my show. She did the first play with you two guys, and then her very next show, they called me. Somebody was looking for a little boy. I said, I don't have a little boy, but I have a little girl for you. Okay. Next thing you know, her very second play, she was
At McHayden
Theater performing and get paid for it.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
get paid for it, and she did a great job. Okay. It's because I went after her. I told her father, let's work with them. Yeah.
So just back to the mountaintop.
We're trying to get there.
It takes time.
Well, I wanted to, Anjali and Remy, and I'm wondering
I directed it. I'm not even.
Is there any preparation or reading that you did or that you would you'd recommend for people before they come? You feel like they should?
I feel like you shouldn't.
Yeah. Okay. That's what
I feel like you shouldn't. I've for years I have read a lot of works by Martin Luther King and different, different diaries and journals and perspectives that he may have had. And so I was kind of prepared from that sense. And obviously, I don't play Martin Luther King, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's what she said.
But I would say that if I were a viewer, seeing this show for the first time, I think not preparing myself at all would be the best. And I think that what makes this play and a lot of newer works so beautiful is how they intricately tie what we've gone through and our history to what's happening right this second, so that you can understand there is a very clear, cause and effect here.
Right.
And that there are some things that are very much still the same.
Yeah.
And so I think that just going in with being a person who exists in 2020 and being open to what's happening and, having that willing suspension of disbelief a little bit is the only thing I would say you should come into the mountaintop with, for sure.
Right.
I think most people will bring to it the understanding that there was a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and that he was assassinated in Memphis at this time. I think that's really what you need to understand. And because it is a highly fictionalized, imaginative, fantastic view of this night.
Right.
But having that understanding that this is embedded in this actual horror, this actual event that galvanized the nation, that was such a significant turning point for us as a nation. I lived in Nashville at the time that this happened. I lived 100 miles away, and was, saw the riots, saw we had the National Guard coming into the city for fear that there would be horrible rioting in Nashville. It was like, we had lived through the assassination of a president. Yeah. And then this was just horrible. And that was the year, right? We also lost Robert Kennedy that year. It was just a really horrible time. And I think if people understand that much, and most people by now, if they've lived through one Martin Luther King Day, they will have heard some pieces of the mountaintop sermon. Absolutely. And so I think just that basic understanding, they're not going to come to this play and learn history.
Right.
No. They're going to learn what's in your heart and what's happening, what could be happening in people's hearts.
My character says to him, you won't feel the hurt. The world will. And I think that is, that's what you're going to learn, is what we do with that hurt. I think as a country, as a nation right now, we are hurting. But what are we going to do with it?
Yeah. Well, on that note, I do want to, I know you're all very busy. You have lots coming up this year. So would you mind letting us know what else we can see you in and what to show up for?
Well, I'll tell you what Confetti has planned. Confetti Stage is a small community theater group. Our home stage is in the Masonic Hall in Albany. And we are currently, I don't know, when does this broadcast
Monday.
Go out? Okay, so we are closing a show on Sunday, a wonderful production of Sarah Rule's Eurydice. We are, and on Monday and Tuesday of next week, we are holding auditions for No Exit, Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialist horror, and we in this coming summer, that play will go up in the end of April, and then in the summertime we are doing a servant for two masters, which is a classic Italian farce. We're doing that in the gardens of Tenbrook Mansion. So that'll be in August. And Confetti is really excited to be doing this performance of the Mountaintop, which will be, just to remind people, February 28th, 29th in the evening, and Sunday, March 1st in the afternoon at the Linda, WAMC's The Linda. What else is on
go ahead.
Black Theater Troupe, you've already said.
Well, I'm directing this for Confetti Stage, and our next big production will be Camp Logan. We started rehearsal last week and last night, and that's coming up April 2nd for 2 weekends and through the 11th. And the story, if anybody would like to know more about the story before you come to see it, just Google the Houston Riot, 1917, and you'll get a little story, and then you'll appreciate the play a lot more. So that's coming up April 2nd, and I'm directing it with seven great talent actors.
Okay. I don't have anything coming up. I'll be auditioning for some things. But I would be remiss not to mention, as the Director of Development for Park Playhouse, that at the end of the month, February 27th, actually, it would be opening night. We are going to be running in repertory until mid-March. 2 shows. So one is Jerry Lee Lewis versus Jerry Lee Lewis, and that's going to be a world premiere. And our second show will be Lady Day at Emerson Bar and Grill. So both are very beautiful jukebox musicals. One about Jerry Lee Lewis and just, the struggle that he went through. He's a very interesting person. And the other about Lady, Billie Holiday on her last day. So those will be running in repertory at Cohoes Music Hall.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the time and the candor, and everyone should go see The Mountaintop. And
Please.
Please. Tickets on sale now.
Go to thelinda.org.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
All right.